Hey, welcome back everyone. Welcome to my kitchen. Why the kitchen? Well, because this is where a lot of important decisions get made about your gut microbiome. And I couldn't find a grocery store that would let me set up and shoot there. Another place. Restaurant, a third place. But the kitchen, this is a big spot for making those critical decisions every day, maybe multiple times a day in the kitchen. And they all have consequences for our gut microbiome. So one of the things that our gut microbiome does for us is digestion, and I want to talk about that in this video. What is digestion? What is happening to the foods we put in our mouth, chew, swallow, and then what? Our grandparents always said, you are what you eat. Well, how does that work? Essentially, in a simplistic form, the whole digestive system is made up of 5 components: the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. Those are the main components, and we swallow things, all kinds of things: food, dust, bacteria that is either on the dust or on the food that we eat. There might be some soil that has bacteria in it if we're eating fresh vegetables, or there might not be. And maybe at night we might swallow a spider once in a while. And so there are 2 processes that this can be broken down into. All of those 5 parts are either doing a mechanical thing or a chemical thing. And frankly, all of the parts of our body are strictly doing mechanical for the most part. There's a little chemical happening there that is part of our bodies, but not much. So we put food in our mouth, we chew it, that's mechanical, we swallow it, and everything after that is a mechanical movement of moving through, or mobility. And the amount of time that it takes for food to go from our mouth to our anus and get through the system is called transit time. Now, we think of things that we swallow as going inside of us, but that's not entirely correct. The whole digestive tract is actually a tube through us, and inside of us is beyond the inner wall of that tube. So when we swallow foods, they're not going inside of us, they're going through us, and that's an important consideration. So food goes moving down the esophagus after we've chewed it. It mixed with saliva, little chemical beginning there from our own bodies. In the stomach, it's mixed with acids and churned into a liquid form, again chemical, and then more mechanical movement into the small intestine. In the small intestine, the pancreas and liver will add some enzymes that will help break down some of the fats and proteins into simpler forms that our body can use. But in the small intestine, there's just a lot of movement happening through there also. When we get to the small intestine, this is where some of our microbiome really starts to show up. This is where we have bacteria that are not part of us, they're living within our small intestine. But it's a pretty small part. And when food material then moves from the small intestine into the large intestine, this is where the magic happens of digestion. So prior to the large intestine, small intestine is just processing some fats and proteins. And also what's happening there is the absorption of some simple sugars, some very short chain carbohydrates. Think here fructose, glucose, sucrose, anything ending with an OSE, essentially sugars, and starches that get converted to sugars. So that's about all our body is absorbing on its own at that point. But we know that there's a lot more to feeding the cells of our body than just simple sugars. We know we need to get other nutrients from our foods. We need not only the simple sugars, but we also need carbohydrates that will give us energy longer term, and we need proteins that are the building blocks of cell structure, essentially muscle building material. And we need fats, and then we need minerals and vitamins. And the real heavy lifting of digestion happens in the large intestine. Here, there is a lot of bacteria. There is roughly 10,000 times more bacteria in the large intestine than is present in the small intestine. It's a little gross, but if you took all of that bacteria in your large intestine, you could scrape it out and plop it on a scale. It would weigh roughly 2.5 pounds. So you can put yourself on a scale and subtract 2.5 pounds and you have your true weight. Inside the large intestine, is billions of little villi, and so the inner wall of the large intestine and the small intestine is not smooth, like perfectly smooth, but all these villi are in there, and they increase the surface area. If you could, again, a little gross, if you could take out all of your small and large intestine and cut it open and flatten it all out, the amount of surface area in there would be roughly equal to the area of the playable surface on a tennis court. So that is an important surface to us. That is where the magic chemistry of digestion happens. And it isn't our bodies doing it, it is the microbiome. The microbiome is breaking down some of the constituents of our foods that we can't digest on our own, that we can't convert into simpler chains that can be absorbed through the villi, through that intestinal wall, where they are then picked up by the bloodstream and whisked away to feed all of the cells of our body, our muscle tissues, our organ tissues, our skin tissue, our brain tissue. That's where the magic happens, is on that surface. And in the large intestine, that bacteria lives in a slimy mucus that not only gives it a home, gives it a place to just exist in, but also between meals, times when we don't eat often, and here I'll stop for a second. In modern society, we eat all the time. We rarely let ourselves get hungry. So the modern microbiome isn't really starving at any point in that sense. But our ancestors had long periods of time between, if they couldn't hunt or gather some food, then the bacteria could live off of that mucus and survive until food was introduced. So what do those bacteria, the microbiome, what do they need to survive and be healthy? They need these complex, long-chain polysaccharides. They're carbohydrates that our bodies can't digest or process on our own. These are tough fibers in vegetables and foods. Think about like the outer skin on broccoli. If you cut open a stalk of broccoli sideways, you'll see in the inside that it's starchy and soft, but on the outside it's very tough, leathery. The microbiome loves the chemical structure of that leathery outer fiber part. This type of fiber, the microbiome breaks it down into simpler chains, into forms that our body can use, and they are passed through the intestinal wall. Another name for these types of fibers or these polysaccharides is prebiotics. So if we're not feeding those kinds of fibers to our microbiome, we're starving off our microbiome. We're also starving ourselves because the microbiome turns those into usable chemicals that our cells can use. In the modern Western world, the problem is that we eat a lot of food. I'm generalizing here, but many of us are eating a lot, but we're not eating those kinds of foods. We're eating all of the simple carbohydrates, sugars, and high glycemic carbs that just simply spike our blood sugar for a short period of time, leave us feeling satiated temporarily, but those kinds of foods just feed yeasts and fungi in our gut, and we get an overgrowth of those, and the healthy bacteria become depleted. And so as they deplete, our cells begin to lack the nutrition they need. And so put in a more simple way, there are many of us in the developed Western world who are eating a lot and starving. So, in short, the digestive system is simply a tube through us that has about 2.5 pounds of magic bacteria that are not a part of us, that do the heavy lifting of our digestion, and they need to be fed the right diet so that they're healthy, and if they're healthy, we're healthy. We don't necessarily digest our food. The microbiome does the digestion for us. And that's why it's so important that we care for our gut microbiome. If you want to stay informed about the latest in gut health, please like this video and subscribe. If you have a question or a comment, please leave it below. I always try to respond. And if you feel this information could be helpful to others, please share it. Thanks for watching.